So I'm Shama. Good morning, everyone. And I'm a financial management consultant with Community Vision. As a financial management consultant, I support all our clients with everything related to finances. So, charting out the different scenarios for them for revenues and for expenses, budgeting, cash flow projections. Some of that you'll see that today. And so now we go back to the roadmap and we're moving on from the current ratio to cash flow projections because this organization is clearly facing some very tough times with respect to their cash flow. And if we were consulting with them and they were our clients, we would recommend that they do a cash flow analysis immediately. So let's see how we go about doing that. Next slide, please. So looking at the cash flow projections, again, this was what Ernesto showed earlier as well. So we can see that they have some deficits here, and then the months of July and August is really bad for the organization. So they started off with their closing balance for last year. So that would be the opening balance for this year. And that's on the left-hand side at the bottom, which says beginning cash. And then you map out your budget against the cash coming in versus cash going out. And with that, they see that there's a couple of challenging months ahead in July and August. Things get better November onwards, but they need to get to that point. And so what are the strategies that you would use to do that? And since July and August are typically red for them, we would actually suggest that they break down that by week, because that'll give a better picture of what cash is coming in and how much cash is going out. And then we can try and come up with a supplemental strategy to kind of bolster the cash position. So next slide, please. So let's see how the organization does when it breaks down the cash flows into weeks. So a week is a long time. You can go to a lender, get a loan, meet with board members, donors, and so on. And so after they put in the weekly projections, they got an extra week. It looks like they're okay for the first week of July, but again, it's the week of July 8th that they are having a deficit. So let's see what strategies they could possibly use to fix it. Next slide, please. So we'll see that the financial decision-making roadmap has some suggestions as well. So once you do your cash flow projections, if the cash flow is negative, then it actually takes you down the roadmap to provide some alternative strategies that you could use. So the first step along is to identify extra sources of capital, so grants, advances, a line of credit, board members who can donate at if you approach them, and so on. So after you've done all of that, you've gotten all your avenues of capital, and if your cash flow is still negative, then you would go to the next step, which is try to advance your receivables and defer your payables. So what this means is that you would, look at your aging summary for your accounts receivable, and if the people who are there who have not paid up for a long time, you would call them and say, "Hey, can you pay up?" And you would do the exact opposite for people that you owe cash to, and take some time from them in deferring your payables. And if that's still negative, then it's time to move to the next step, which is basically expense reductions. To temporarily put off some repairs and maintenance or professional development and so on. And if all of that still leads to a negative cash at the end of the period, then you might need to make some operational changes, some permanent expense reductions. So next slide, please. So the blue squares over here represents all the expenses that have been cut, or you may have delayed them. So for example, if you were planning to spend $6,400 for supplies in July, we are now going to cut it, or we're going to reduce it. And we were going to spend about $1,500 in August for repairs, which will hold off on, and so on. So now we see that the week of July 29th is no longer negative. The week of August 12th is a positive. We are moving in the right direction, but we still need to make changes. So let's see what could happen in the next iteration of changes. Next slide, please. So now we're again taking the occupancy cost of $6,300. We won't get rid of it because landlord is not that generous, but we'll push it to a later period of time. So say instead of paying on the first, we could ask the landlord if he could pay it at a later time in the month. So now we have a healthier balance, end of first week of July and moving in the right direction. So now with all these workings, if we approach a lender, we know what we need to ask for instead of just throwing out an arbitrary number saying that we need X amount of dollars. So approaching lenders with this sort of backup documentation puts the organization in a better place. So let's see what happens next. So now they've looked very closely at expenses. They have reduced whatever is possible. They have deferred what's possible, and also the timing. And so they've come to a decision that they need a line of credit in the week of July, and that they'd like an amount of $25,000. So in the world of line of credit, that's not too high. You could get it from a local lender, a credit union, community bank. And for a $1 million organization, it's not too big of an ask. And so with putting in those numbers and also planning for a payback of that amount in September, we see that the organization is in a better position. The red squares have kind of disappeared. And so let's move on to the next slide to figure out our strategy. So over here, we'll see how the story ends. So after doing all these cash flow projections, they were able to take a really strong narrative with backup documentation to a lender and say, hey, we need a total of about $60,000 over the next 7 weeks over that period, but we need only $25,000 in the week of July 8th, which we could pay back $25,000 in the month of September. And that additional cash infusion would help us go through. And this is the sort of strategy that you would put together and you would take it to a lender or you would take it to a donor or anybody else who has capital available. It shows that you put a great deal of thought in planning out your cash inflows. It matches to your budget and you've kind of planned the repayment of that as well. And so next slide, please. And so one thing about being a nonprofit is that there's a lot of consensus building and lots of opportunities to bring people along your way of thinking. And there are a lot of decision makers. So depending on how big your organization is and who's on your board, how many staff you have, how you engage with your constituents, you might have to share your strategy with them to get on board. Sometimes the board members are not very comfortable with asking for a line of credit. Maybe debt is something that they've never taken on. But with showing this workings, showing that, this will help you bump through a rough period of time, but you have a plan for repayment and that's a good thing for the organization. You'll be able to meet your mission and build on your midterm sustainability and long-term sustainability with all these workings. This sort of helps you bring that consensus within your organization and to your board as well.